Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. In the heart of an ancient forest, far removed from the bustling cities and sprawling kingdoms of the outside world, lay the village of Veritas. Nestled between towering trees that seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky, Veritas was a place of mystery, tradition, and unyielding faith. For generations, the villagers of Veritas had lived under the watchful eye of the Wheel of Fate, a massive structure of stone and wood that stood at the center of their lives. Every 10 years, the wheel would turn, and with it, the future of every villager would be revealed. The wheel was no ordinary device, it was a relic of a time long forgotten, said to be crafted by the gods themselves. Its surface was covered in intricate carvings, symbols that seemed to shift and change with each passing year. No one knew the true origins of the wheel, but the villagers believed in its power without question. To them, it was a beacon of divine guidance, a tool that ensured the balance between the village and the natural world surrounding it. As the story begins, the village is preparing for the turning of the wheel, an event that occurs once every decade. It is a time of both anticipation and dread, for the wheel's decrees are absolute. Some would be blessed with prosperity, while others might be cursed with hardship. And so, the villagers gathered in the central square, their faces etched with a mixture of hope and fear. Elric, a young farmer of 25, stood among them, his heart heavy with uncertainty. He had been raised in Veritas, taught to respect the wheel and accept whatever fate it bestowed upon him. But as the years passed, Elric had begun to question the fairness of the wheel's decisions. He had seen good people suffer while the cruel and selfish prospered. The idea that his future could be determined by a turn of the wheel filled him with unease. The village elder, Eldric, a man of over 70 winters, approached the wheel with reverence. His long, silver beard flowed down his chest, and his eyes, though clouded with age, still held the authority that had kept the village united for decades. Eldric raised his hands, calling for silence, and the villagers obeyed, their breaths held in collective anticipation. "People of Veritas," Eldric began, his voice carrying the weight of countless ceremonies before this one, "the time has come once more for the Wheel of Fate to guide us. We place our lives in the hands of the gods, trusting that they will steer us towards the path we are meant to follow." The crowd murmured in agreement, though Elric remained silent. His gaze was fixed on the wheel, a monolithic structure that seemed to pulsate with an energy of its own. Eldric turned towards the wheel and, with a practiced motion, laid his hands on its rough surface. He closed his eyes and whispered a prayer, one that had been passed down through the generations. "May the gods grant us their wisdom," he intoned, and with that, he gave the wheel a mighty push. The wheel groaned as it began to turn, its ancient mechanisms creaking under the strain. The villagers watched in rapt attention as the symbols on the wheel blurred together, a whirlwind of potential futures. Elric's heart pounded in his chest as he awaited the outcome. When the wheel finally came to a halt, it did so with a loud thud, and the symbols on its surface realigned to reveal the fates of the villagers. One by one, the villagers stepped forward to receive their destinies. A young woman named Mira was blessed with a bountiful harvest, while an elderly man named Jonas was fated to lose his sight. The villagers accepted their fates with stoic resignation, as they had always done. But when Elric's turn came, his fate was unlike any he had expected. Eldric approached Elric with the slip of parchment that bore his fate. The elder's hands trembled slightly as he handed it over, and for a brief moment, Elric saw something in Eldric's eyes, a flicker of doubt, or perhaps fear. Elric unrolled the parchment, his eyes scanning the words written in an ancient script. His fate was clear: "You shall suffer great loss, and your future shall be one of hardship and sorrow." A cold chill ran down Elric's spine as he read the words. His worst fears had been realized. The wheel had condemned him to a life of suffering, and there was nothing he could do to change it, except that was a lie he refused to accept. Elric's hands clenched into fists, the parchment crumpling in his grip. He turned to face the wheel, anger and defiance burning in his chest. The villagers, sensing his unrest, began to whisper among themselves, but Elric paid them no mind. He wouldn't, accept this fate. Not without a fight. Over the following days, Elric's anger festered like a wound that refused to heal. He sought out Lyra, his closest friend and the village healer. Lyra was known for her wisdom and gentle demeanor, and she had always been a voice of reason in Elric's life. But even she could not quell the storm that raged within him. "Elric," Lyra said softly, as they sat by the river that flowed through the village, "I know you're upset, but the wheel's decisions are not to be questioned. It's been this way for generations. We must trust that there is a reason for everything, even if we don't understand it." Elric shook his head, frustration evident in his every movement. "How can you say that, Lyra? How can you just accept whatever the will tells us? Look at Jonas, he's going to lose his sight. And Mira? She's going to have everything she's ever wanted while the rest of us suffer. It's not fair." Lyra placed a hand on Elric's arm, trying to calm him. "Life isn't always fair, Elric. But the wheel has guided us for centuries. We've survived because of it." "Survived," Elric repeated bitterly. "Is that all we're meant to do? Survive, while others thrive? I can't accept that. I won't." Lyra's expression softened, her eyes filled with concern. "What are you going to do, Elric? You can't fight the wheel." Elric looked out at the river, his jaw set in determination. "Maybe not," he said, "but I can try. I'm going to find out the truth about the wheel. And if I have to destroy it to change my fate, then so be it." Lyra's eyes widened in alarm. "Elric, no. You can't." But Elric was already on his feet, his mind made up. "I have to, Lyra. I can't live like this. I can't let the wheel control my life." He turned and walked away, leaving Lyra staring after him, her heart heavy with fear for what was to come. Elric's quest for the truth began with the village archives, a dusty room filled with ancient scrolls and manuscripts that had been passed down through the ages. Few villagers ever ventured into the archives, and even fewer knew how to decipher the old texts. But Elric was determined, and he spent long hours poring over the documents, searching for any hint of the wheel's origins. Days turned into weeks, and Elric's obsession with the wheel grew. He barely ate, barely slept, consumed by the need to understand the force that had dictated his life. And finally, after what felt like an eternity, he found something, a fragment of an old legend, buried deep within the pages of a crumbling manuscript. The legend spoke of a time before the wheel, a time when the villagers of Veritas had lived freely, guided by their own choices rather than the whims of fate. But then, a great calamity had struck, a plague that threatened to wipe out the entire village. Desperate, the villagers had called upon the gods for help, and the wheel of fate had been their answer. The wheel, the legend claimed, was a gift from the gods, a way to ensure the village's survival by maintaining balance between the villagers' free will and the natural order. But the legend also hinted at a darker truth. The wheel, it said, was not infallible. It could be influenced, manipulated even, by those who knew how. And those who sought to control the wheel for their own gain risked bringing about the very disaster it was meant to prevent. Elric's heart raced as he read the words. The wheel was not a divine, unchangeable force, it was a tool, one that could be used for good or ill. And if it could be manipulated, then perhaps it could be destroyed, with this newfound knowledge, Elric's resolve hardened. He would confront the elder, Eldric, and demand answers. If Eldric refused to help, Elric would destroy the wheel himself. The confrontation came sooner than Elric had expected. One evening, as he was leaving the archives, he found Eldric waiting for him at the entrance. The elder's expression was grave, his eyes dark with concern. "I know what you've been doing, Elric," Eldric said, his voice heavy with the weight of years. "You've been reading the old texts, haven't you?" Elric met the elder's gaze, his own eyes filled with defiance. "I had to know the truth. The wheel isn't what we've been told it is. It's not divine, it's just a tool, one that can be used or misused. And I won't let it control my life." Eldric sighed, his shoulders sagging under the burden of his years. "You don't understand, Elric. The wheel is more than just a tool, it's the only thing keeping our village safe. Without it, we would be lost." "Safe?" Elric repeated incredulously. "Safe from what? From our own choices? From living our lives the way we want to? From the calamity that nearly destroyed us all," Eldric said, his voice rising with emotion. "The wheel was a gift from the gods, a way to protect us from our own hubris. Without it, we would fall into chaos." Elric shook his head, his anger bubbling to the surface. "That's just another lie, another way to keep us under control. The wheel doesn't protect us, it enslaves us." Eldric's face hardened, his eyes narrowing. "You're playing with forces you don't understand, Elric. The wheel is not something to be trifled with. If you try to destroy it, you could bring about the very disaster you seek to prevent." But Elric was beyond reason. His mind was set, his heart burning with the fire of rebellion. "I don't care," he said, his voice low and determined. "I'd rather risk everything than live under the wheel's tyranny." And with that, Elric turned and walked away, leaving the elder standing in the doorway, his heart heavy with the weight of what was to come. That night, as the village slept, Elric made his way to the sacred grove where the Wheel of Fate stood. The moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the village. The grove was silent, the air thick with tension. Elric's heart pounded in his chest as he approached the wheel, his hands trembling with anticipation. He stood before the wheel, the massive structure towering over him. For a moment, doubt crept into his mind. Was he really about to do this? Was he really about to defy the gods and risk the wrath of fate? But then he thought of the words on the parchment, the fate that had been forced upon him, and his resolve returned. With a deep breath, Elric reached out and placed his hands on the wheel. The surface was cool and rough beneath his fingers, the carvings shifting and changing as he touched them. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the wheel began to hum, a low, resonant sound that seemed to vibrate through Elric's entire body. The air around him seemed to shimmer, and suddenly, the spirit of the wheel appeared before him, a figure made of light and shadow, its form shifting and ethereal. The spirit's eyes, or what passed for eyes, glowed with an otherworldly light as it regarded Elric. "You seek to destroy the wheel," the spirit said, its voice a soft whisper that seemed to echo in Elric's mind. "Why?" Elric swallowed hard, his mouth dry. "Because it's not right," he said, his voice trembling. "The wheel controls our lives, forces us into fates we don't want. It's not fair. I want to be free." The spirit regarded him silently for a long moment, its form flickering like a flame in the wind. "The wheel is not a tool of control," it said finally. "It is a balance. It exists to maintain harmony between free will and the natural order. Without it, chaos would reign. "That's what they all say," Elric replied, his voice gaining strength. "But I don't believe it. I've seen the legends, the stories. The wheel can be manipulated, controlled. It's not infallible. The wheel can be influenced," the spirit admitted, its voice soft. "But that does not mean it is malevolent. It is a reflection of the choices made by the villagers, a mirror of their desires and fears. The wheel does not dictate fate, it responds to it." Elric shook his head, his resolve unwavering. "Then I'll change it. I'll destroy the wheel and set us all free." The spirit's form flickered, and for a moment, it seemed to waver, as if caught between two worlds. "If you destroy the wheel," it said slowly, "you risk unraveling the very fabric of your reality. The balance would be lost, and the calamity that once threatened your village would return. Is that a risk you are willing to take?" Elric hesitated, his mind racing. The spirit's words echoed in his ears. Was he really willing to risk everything for his freedom? But then he thought of his fate, the life of suffering and sorrow that awaited him if he did nothing. He couldn't accept that. He couldn't live like that. "Yes," he said finally, his voice firm. "I'm willing to take that risk." The spirit regarded him for a long moment, its eyes glowing with an intense light. Then, slowly, it began to fade, its form dissolving into the air. "So be it," it whispered, and with that, it was gone. Elric stood alone before the wheel, his heart pounding in his chest. The air around him was thick with tension, the silence oppressive. He took a deep breath, his hands shaking as he reached for the wheel once more. But as his fingers brushed against its surface, something inside him changed. In that moment, Elric realized that the wheel was not his enemy. It was not a tool of oppression, but a reflection of the choices he and the villagers had made. It was a balance, a way to maintain harmony in a world filled with chaos. And if he destroyed it, he would be destroying more than just the wheel, he would be destroying the very fabric of their reality. Elric's hands fell to his sides, his heart heavy with the weight of his realization. He couldn't destroy the wheel. Not without dooming them all. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving the wheel intact. But as he left the grove, a new resolve took hold of him. He wouldn't destroy the wheel, but he would change the way the villagers interacted with it. He would find a way to balance their free will with the guidance of the wheel, to ensure that no one would be forced into a fate they didn't want. When Elric returned to the village, the sun was just beginning to rise, casting a warm glow over the rooftops. The villagers were already stirring, going about their daily routines. But as Elric walked through the village, he noticed the way they looked at him, curious, wary, as if they sensed something had changed. Eldric was waiting for him at the entrance to the village square, his expression grim. "What have you done, Elric?" the elder asked, his voice filled with concern. Elric met the elder's gaze, his own eyes filled with determination. "I haven't destroyed the wheel," he said, "but I've realized that we've been using it the wrong way. The wheel isn't meant to control us, it's meant to guide us. We can still make our own choices, but the wheel can help us find the right path." Eldric regarded Elric for a long moment, his eyes searching the young man's face. Finally, the elder nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. "Perhaps you're right," he said quietly. "Perhaps it's time we re-examine the way we've been living. The wheel has been a part of our lives for so long, we've forgotten that we have the power to shape our own destinies." With Eldric's support, Elric gathered the villagers in the square and spoke to them of his discovery. He told them of the legend, of the wheel's true purpose, and of the balance that was needed between fate and free will. The villagers listened, some with skepticism, others with hope, but by the end, they agreed to try a new way of life. From that day forward, the villagers of Veritas no longer relied solely on the wheel to dictate their futures. They still respected its guidance, but they also made their own choices, petitioning the wheel only when they needed help finding the right path. And as the years passed, the village flourished in a way it never had before. Elric and Lyra stood together before the wheel, watching as the villagers went about their lives. The wheel still turned, still offered its guidance, but it no longer held the power it once had. It was a tool, not a master, and the villagers were free to choose their own destinies. As the sun set over the village, casting a warm, golden light over the rooftops, Elric felt a sense of peace he had never known before. His fate was no longer set in stone, no longer dictated by a turn of the wheel. His future was his own to shape, his own to decide, and as he stood there, hand in hand with Lyra, Elric knew that whatever the future held, he was ready to face it, with hope, with determination, and with the knowledge that he had the power to shape his own destiny.